Throughout the conference, we have heard women tell their stories, both personal and professional. But what are some of the systemic obstacles women face in achieving success? The final panel discussion of this year's conference will explore how we can work with allies to achieve equal pay, increase the number of women in the boardroom, create mentorship, and provide the same career growth opportunities for women that are available to men. Our moderator is Lavonna Lewis, a teaching professor of public policy and the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Saul Price School of Public Policy. I would now like to introduce Lavonna Lewis.
Thank you, Carrie, for the introduction. I'm delighted to share the virtual stage with these experts who are so passionate for wanting to make the world a better place for everyone. Joining me today is Rockwell Waki Chin, a member of the New York City Commission on Human Rights, a retired government civil rights attorney. He previously served as the director of the Office of Equal Opportunity and Diversity at the New York State Division of Human Rights. Our second panelist is Meryl Vaughn, the national law firm diversity practice leader and partner recruiter for Major, Lindsay, and Africa, one of the world's premier legal executive search firms. She is a sought-after speaker and the host of a popular podcast, BS Beyond Stereotypes. Our last panel is John Eno, the president of the USC Alumni Association Board of Governors and the global chair, Diversity and Inclusion at Reed Smith, LLP. In this role, he acts as a change agent for the international law firm's effort to sponsor and achieve diversity and inclusion in the legal community. So thank you all for joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are geographically. And I want to start by, since I'm an academic on campus, we always want to start with kind of a clear definition of concept. And I just want to kind of talk a little bit about what do we mean when we talk about allyship. And so I want to start by saying it starts with being allies, the fact that we acknowledge that privilege exists and that we may be beneficiaries of that privilege. We're aware of what that means for us and also the people from marginalized groups. And so it begins with this acknowledgement. It agrees with this idea of ultimately something that needs to be done about an action orientation. And so when we talk about allies, particularly for women, we're talking about recognizing that in many instances, the world has been designed, whether we like it or not, sometimes with men in mind. And so what happens when we're trying to bring in other voices? How do we get people to recognize those differences and not just recognize them, but take an active role in trying to address those differences? And so that's a very generic definition of what it means to be an ally. But fundamentally, it really is recognizing our advantage and thinking about how do we use our advantage, our privilege for the benefit of others. And so again, I want to start with you, Meryl, and ask a question. We've heard about bystanders, but now we're talking about an upstander. And so could you talk about what it means to be an upstander in this space?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me here. Fight on. I have to say it. Fight on. We are all fighting on these days, I think. And to answer your question, yeah, an upstander is someone who takes up for someone who is being marginalized, someone who is in the moment experiencing a microaggressions, someone who either speaks up on that person's behalf or feels that it's the best thing in the moment is to take the pressure off of that person who is experiencing a microaggression, and it's basically an ally who decides in the moment that they want to make sure that someone is not being bullied or that people understand that they may be making someone else feel uncomfortable.
Thank you so much for that definition, that kind of response. John, the next question is coming to you, and also feel free to respond to the previous question as well. But how do you feel people may or may not be comfortable with being allies?
Thanks, Lavonna. And actually, I was first responding to your definition of allyship. I thought I'd just add another term. I don't know if folks have heard the term of performative allyship. And that really, it means that you are an ally because it helps you, but you're not really being an ally to help the other person. A classic example I like to give is, folks that might be posting Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter, or hashtag BLM. But what are you doing to support the Black community? What are you doing to support your Black colleagues? So just saying it to make yourself look good is not true allyship. That would be performative allyship. And so as I think about upstanders, and following up on what Merle said, the term allies probably started with the LGBT community. And the LGBT community, when polled, they say, what does it mean to be an effective upstander or effective ally? And while others that aren't part of our LGBT community, they said, well, be supportive, attend events, attend, pride parades and things like that, or other work-sponsored events. But it's more than that. What they really looked for was people to speak up, defend them, back them up, and sponsor. That's really where upstander behavior comes through. So in response to your question in terms of why folks may be uncomfortable or may or not be uncomfortable being allies, there's a number of reasons. And hopefully for the benefit of this panel, the attendees at the conference today, what we're trying to also understand is awareness. So if you can create awareness as to why people may feel uncomfortable being an ally, then you can actually understand and help engage those folks. So the first one is kind of very simple, is that the persons don't know what to do. Or they may not know how the other person may feel if someone were to step in. A classic example I give here is there was a Black associate in one of our offices, and in her group, after the George Floyd killings and all the emotion that went on that week, she said she was so hurt because no one in her group, of all the people that she worked with, reached out to her and say, "Are you doing okay? And how are you doing?" And when finally asked, other folks, said, "Why didn't you, at least reach out to her and check in?" And the answer was, "Because I felt uncomfortable. I didn't know how to bring up the conversation." And ultimately, it would have been so much better if you had just done something as opposed to feeling comfortable and not stepping up. Another reason why people don't step up is they may fear there's a loss of relationships. That if they were to interfere with the problem person, they may be disapproved. They may fear retaliation because if the person who said something or did something is in a position of power, maybe the people will feel retaliation. They may be embarrassed or feel like they lack confidence, like I said, because they may feel I say something and it might not be the right thing. And finally, a lot of times people don't take action is because they believe someone else is going to take the action. They said, well, I'm not going to get involved because I'm probably not the right person. Someone else should do it, or I'm sure somebody else would say something. All those are excuses to not take action, and to become aware of these excuses or reasons why you're not taking action. Hopefully that leads to more engagement.
Thank you, John, for that response. And again, just the acknowledgement of recognizing that people may be in different spaces, and that may be kind of part of the conversation that we need to address as well. Rocky, so the next question is for you. Actually, you and I are both going to answer this one, but I want you to start first, right? It's like, how do we collectively do outreach to engage allies?
Well, thank you, Dr. Lewis. I first of all want to thank you for inviting me, and it's just wonderful being here in Southern California, but I'm actually in New York City. So, and I want to just answer this with you, because I think one of the things is, sometimes we get in a room and we just go on and on. I think men do this a lot. Since this is a women's conference, I feel that's one of the things we need to do is listen more and listen to what people are saying and not just be so self-centered. But I want to go back to also what Merle was saying, and also John. There's an aspect of allyship, which I think, being a civil rights attorney, which is the concept of what I think is the topic of this conference, which is together we are more. We're not just talking about individual action, but we're trying to talk about a society where we value other people, where we talk about civil rights, And so I see it really from a civil rights perspective. So when you come back to this question, and Lavonna, I certainly appreciate your input. To me, it's an unfinished agenda, because this whole context is not just about, being nice to people. And also what John says, I think, is absolutely right. It's not really just about helping people, but really how it affects ourselves. But it's also about how we change the world around us, our workplace, where we play, our community, our neighbors, and our country. So, I've kind of broadened it out, and I just happen to look like, what is today, Saturday, March 6th. It just happens to be the date of the Dred Scott Act. And I picked that up from a calendar that I had. That's a very significant, bad Supreme Court decision. And I won't go into it, but part of allyship is knowing who we are and knowing what's the significance of some of that history. I don't know if I answered the collective part, but Lavonna, why don't you just jump in?
No, Rocky, I really appreciate that response, because I want people to understand that it really is work from the inside out, right? I mean, it's like my collective responsibility begins with me recognizing that I'm part of the problem and I'm part of the solution. And I can get collective support for that if I can get other people to understand that too, to recognize that we all stand to win and lose if we do. We win if we do it correctly, we lose if we don't. But to really recognize that we're trying to bring in different voices, different perspectives. And sometimes that's challenging, and that's why the issue of allyship is so important. People need to know that if I fail, then I don't have to lose relationships. I don't have to lose my place in this organization or in this family, whatever the kind of the relationship may be. And so collective action means in part that I want people to know that I'm going to do everything that I can to be empathetic and see things your way, because again, that's part of our conversation as well. But also to kind of be curious, to figure out, what can we do together? And if we're not asking those questions, again, of one another, again, collective action is going to be very difficult, because we're all just being concerned about winning and losing our sides. And so we have to accept the challenge of, again, we're moving someone's agenda forward, not just our own.
And I guess I should just add that collective action, I think we feel, if it's done in the way we're talking about, will bring about a better result for everybody. I mean, obviously, it takes relationship building. It takes a lot of other things. It's not always just a one-on-one thing, but I think collective action is really key, because if we're just doing it one-on-one, it really has very limited. But like at this conference, we have thousands of people. We all take one action that is positive. That would be great.
Can I also add that, one of the things that should not go without being said is that silence is deafening. And you go back to what one of the things that John said after this summer during those tough times after George Floyd's murder, and those of us who were in corporate settings, we were exhausted, we were reeling, especially if we are considered thought leaders in the area. We were fielding so many questions, but we were trying to go through our personal pain at the same time, and to be in situations where you have the exact opposite of what John mentioned, where your company pulls together something in the company in order to have those conversations, and there's complete silence, just silence. Nobody says anything. I would just like people to understand that that's actually worse. That feels worse than having somebody say something that may potentially make them feel inadequate. As long as it's not defensive, as long as it's empathetic, as long as it's curious, and as long as you're not asking the person who is hurting to make you feel better in the moment, I think it's better to say something than nothing.
I love that, Merle. And just echoing what Brocky and Lavonna said as well. I love the concept of collective action, but it also starts with the individual. And we see so many people that say, I want to have a mentor. I want people to mentor me. I want to have allies. I want to have people that are going to be allies for me. But it starts with you. If you don't demonstrate that you're an ally to people, that you're a mentor to other people, it's hard to say, hey, mentor me, be an ally for me. What are you doing, right? And so it really starts with a person, and that collective action of everyone taking that action can actually make a real difference.
Right. And the other thing, John, is you have to ask, right? If you don't ask for something, you will get nothing, right? And the worst thing that somebody can tell you if you ask for help is no. And that's, it's not going to hurt you for somebody to tell you no, but you can hurt yourself by not asking for help.
So that was a question that obviously touched a nerve for all of the folks on the panel, which I think is wonderful, because again, it is a high priority for all of us in various ways. And so I want to go back to you, John, because you mentioned this idea of doing something, and the fact that, again, all too often, to Meryl's point, people don't ask for help because they don't know what's going to happen. They're silent because, again, they may say the wrong thing. They fear being judged. All of these things that can be going on in someone's head that we know nothing about. But so how can someone know when to stand up and if it's going to be effective? Again, given all of those constraints, all of those uncertainties, how can we know that this might be the time to stand up?
Well, I tell you that it's a lot of it's fairly easy. If you just look at your gut and you feel your gut, and there's something wrong here, and if it seems wrong to you, then it probably is wrong, right? That's kind of an easy easy litmus test. I guess as you're looking at any situation, there are a number of factors to think about as you decide whether or not you're going to act. The first is just be aware of your own bias and the way that you process whatever just happened. Are you also looking at it through a lens of bias? Right. So it's important to understand that. Then the second thing, that deciding whether to act, is assess the situation. Right. The context really matters here. So, if you were to do something, and I give an example of, okay, if you see someone being attacked, you may want to get, literally physically being attacked, you get involved. Or if you were getting involved, would you, be outnumbered and you would similarly be at risk? Similar with this speaking up. If you spoke up, is it going to make matters worse for the quote victim, right? Because if it's a conversation that's making, they all of a sudden become more vilified by raising that. So you have to assess that. Are there other ways to mitigate this risk? So ultimately, if you decide to act, I say there's like what we call the 4 Ds. You can take direct action. You can distract, you can delay, or you can delegate. And going over all those, number 1, direct action, just step in. Say, I think, what you just said was wrong, and here's why I think it may have been wrong. Or you can be, a little bit, I really like you as a person, and I know you didn't mean it, but what you just said kind of was offensive or sexist. Second, distract. If the conversation is going down an uncomfortable lines, change the subject and just, say, let's talk about something else. It's easy to move on so that the victims not continue to be victimized. The third is delay. You may not want to act right then, but act later. So, if someone said something, for example, in a meeting and it made someone feel very uncomfortable, well, there's probably 2 people you might want to talk to. Is the person the victim, say, hey, I'm sorry what you just heard. Maybe it wasn't appropriate at that time to intervene. So delay, but also go talk to the person, the offender, so to speak, and say, okay, I didn't want to raise it in the meeting, but, or whatever situation, but, what you had just did, what you said, may have been viewed by some people as wrong or sexist or racist or whatever. It just made people uncomfortable. So you can certainly act outside of that immediate circumstance. And finally, is delegate. Maybe you aren't the right person to raise it. I think in terms of corporate hierarchies, maybe if you're a junior person, it's hard for you to go to a senior person and say something. Well, enlist someone else that might be better positioned to intervene and go say something and go speak to that person. So that's what we call delegation. So the 4Ds in deciding to act, whether or not it's going to be effective, consider what the circumstance and then decide to act.
Thank you, John. So, Rocky, this may not be completely fair, but I'm going to come back to you with the same question, because I know that with your kind of civil rights experience, I think so many people feel like they're so close to the line, and it's those gray areas that may be creating those kind of uncomfortable spaces. And so, can you talk about again when you might want to speak up in those type of environments where again people are very sensitive to legal obligations, but may not be as sensitive to just the interpersonal things that may be getting in the way?
Sure. Well, I appreciate John's work because, it's easy to remember the 4Ds and things like that. But so I think a lot of it depends on if you're in what environment you're in. Obviously, if you're in an office environment, if you're in a work environment, we have, employment laws, we have civil rights laws, which govern that, is very different than when you're outside on the street. And so I kind of think we have to recognize, and maybe this is controversial, but that we've gone through a couple of years of bullying from people who are out there in the society. A lot of that, if it was happening in the workplace, would be considered harassment. Harassments, plain and simple harassment, sexual harassment, racial harassment. When you call somebody a name, etc. When you spread things like that, and there are recourses to doing that. So I would just say, if you're in a work situation, it's really important to kind of evaluate. There should be somebody designated to handle that, and that person cannot be somebody who has a conflict with your employer or whatever. Oftentimes that happens. I don't want to kind of name names, but we're going through some of this in my own state. If you're the top of the food chain, but see yourself as somehow exempt from sexual harassment, training and things like that. Well, that happens in a lot of law firms are sometimes the worst, in terms of that. And I'm sure John has been, doing a lot of workshops there. But when you're on the street or when you're sometimes in a school setting, it's a little bit different. And so I guess the main thing is when we're talking about issues of discrimination, it doesn't even have to be racial or gender discrimination or whatever, but it could just be bullying and really untoward language. I think you need to think of this thing about allyship with others. And so that really is the concept of not just myself, but I'm going to be working with people within that community to address these things. We've had a lot of anti-Asian bias recently. Well, obviously, it's not a new thing. There's been, we know from the George Floyd case that there's been, centuries of discrimination against African Americans. But the thing is that you have to build allies. You have to build very strong institutions so that you aren't the only one addressing these problems, especially when it comes up in society. And I think we're getting closer to recognizing that, but we also have a lot of people who are pushing back, people who don't really recognize that it really is in everybody's interest, to make sure that we don't tear people down, we don't denigrate people, we don't harass people. But you think that would be common sense, but unfortunately, it happens everywhere. And you can start with your kids. The last thing I'll say is we don't become, I'm a baby boomer generation. Most of the folks on this panel are younger, and we don't become who we are overnight. And I don't want to go into my own background, but I grew up in Kentucky, child of a college professor in Berea College. Berea College was an integrated college before they were forced to kick out the African American students. It's a very well-known school, and yet Berea itself, I was looking and Googling, had an incident with the KKK as recently as 2000 something. Shocking. I had not lived there, for many years, but what you realize is we pick up a lot from each other, but also our education. And I think the one thing that really impacted me is just realizing I didn't know a lot about my own history as a Chinese American. I didn't know really anything about African American. You cannot really assume that you just know everything about slavery. So I think as an attorney, and I know we have many attorneys on this panel, part of it is not just taking legal courses, but learning really what went behind some of these terrible decisions, getting beyond that. What's really going on in our society, which puts one group of people on top and another group of people, under them. And I think once we start learning that, we can appreciate that to address what you're talking about, Lavonna, whether it's in the workplace or let's say in the school setting, we have to have allies that are, that are going to make those institutions change. And we're seeing that, all over, but it's one step forward or two steps forward and sometimes a little step backward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rocky, for that answer. And I really did want to, and again, I wanted to kind of bring that into the space, the idea that context matters, the fact that we're talking about something that really is developmental or at least process oriented, the fact that we are constantly learning and unlearning. And so we have to be open to that. Again, if we're going to be effective allies, we have to be in tune to what's going around us. And so, Meryl, I'm going to ask you this question. Since this is, again, the two of us, how can women be allies to other underrepresented groups? Again, we know that we all have privilege. And so, again, we're acknowledging the fact that, again, we may be disadvantaged in one category, but may be able to elevate in others. And so can you talk a little bit about how women can be allies for others?
Yeah, what I think about is, first of all, that we all have to recognize our privilege, right? Just because we are of a certain race doesn't mean that we're not economically privileged or have, educational privilege or whatever our privilege is. We should all recognize it. The example that I loved from all of the things that happened this summer was the example of the mothers who came out during the Black Lives Matter protests and stood in the front. They and they were called to that. They were called to that. I remember signs that said, when George Floyd called for his mother, he called for me. And it didn't matter what race you were, where you lived, what social economic status you were in. If you didn't feel that, something's wrong. And not just feeling it. I mean, I felt it, but there were women, there was numerous women who got together and decided to be allies for the Black Lives Matter folks and stood in front of them with linked arms. And let's not forget, they were white women. And, as it's unfortunate that actually worked. And I say it's unfortunate because it worked because they were white women. But it was beautiful that they used, they recognized that we're all the same, and that babies, that the folks behind them were had mothers. They were somebody's babies, and to the extent that they could help protect them, they were there to do that. And I think that's a poignant example of how someone can be an ally, and probably never expected to be put in that situation at all. You can do it at work. If you see, an example of a microaggression is if you see someone, petting, someone's hair, a person of color's hair, touching their hair. that's a microaggression, and to John, using John's D's to diffuse that situation, because that is a situation that needs to be diffused. That's why there are laws that are coming out about being able to wear your hair naturally, which seems ridiculous, but it's a thing. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, I mean, I think you were on point. It was a very powerful reminder of the importance of solidarity, right? I mean, I think we help each other first of all by letting one another know that we're not alone. It is that feeling by yourself that often that causes so much harm. And so being willing to, if you're in those spaces and see that other women aren't, are we actively engaged in lifting up their names? Or if we're talking about other groups in general, if you're in the room and they're not, are we doing things to actively say their name? Are we doing things that, again, let others know that they could do more? But we also have to, again, encourage people to know that folks need the opportunity. And again, if we have a voice, if we're using our privilege, we can bring other people into the conversation. But again, that goes back to our willingness to take a stand. And I want to make sure that folks know that please, if you have questions for us, put them in the chat box. And this is the last question that I have for this panel before we go to questions from the audience. And this is the order. Hopefully, if you can answer the question in this order, Rocky, Meryl, and John. And then here's the question. Could you provide an example of how and when to safely stand up? And I know that we've tap danced around this a little bit, but again, an example, I think, just of how and when to safely stand up, and just kind of from your experience, if something stands out, if the answer is, nothing comes to mind, then the answer is nothing comes to mind. But just to kind of, again, just share one experience. Again, Rocky, Meryl, John, in that order.
Sure. Well, I'll just give an experience from my own work in a government agency, which should know better, right? I worked in both the city and the state civil rights agencies, and you would think that they would be politically correct, so to speak. But the example I wanted to give is in terms of how to know better is when I first started one of the agencies, people would look at me and somebody would come in to file a complaint who was Chinese or Asian, and they would not speak English, and they would call me to come. Now, I speak very little, if any, and they would say, come and translate. They would just assume that I knew. I spoke up and I said, this is not right. You have to have language material. You have to have Spanish, you have to have Chinese. And even though I was not at the top of the food chain, that's something that I think I've been able to do both at the city and at the state in pushing language rights. And, that's so important in terms of people being able to speak and express. If you can't do that, then, you might as well just have your lips sealed. So don't be afraid. In that case, it wasn't kind of a racist kind of thing, but it was kind of a patronizing way of looking at people who don't speak English. And I think what I felt is, I'm not going to worry about my rank being low or whatever. I'm just going to speak up and tell the commissioner, tell the people, tell the general counsel this is wrong, and educate them. And in that situation, I guess I had to balance, like, am I going to get punished or whatever? And I said, well, the worst that could happen is we'd have a big argument over it, and maybe I would lose, but at least I would have made my point. So that's in a very controlled environment. I understand that. That's in an employment situation, but I think you still want to have situations in an employment situation where people can feel that they can speak out and out of their principles and educate others and not being arrogant about it.
Thank you, Rocky. Meryl, please.
So I have to say that, just a little background, I grew up in Compton, and I grew up in an environment where I was bullied every day. I was bullied for being smart. I was bullied for being the way I looked, for the way I looked. And the fact that, I liked studying whatever it was, I was bullied. And so when I went to law school, I realized that you could actually fight back in words, and that that you could protect yourself and others without having fear of a physical threat. And so that's a huge thing. And so for me, I've not been shy about standing up for others, about speaking out, about insisting on being authentic, insisting on being unapologetically Black. But what I will say is I've been in situations where I felt, so I say that to say that I'm much more candid, I think, than a lot of people are. And I don't come from a place of fear. I refuse to be in a place of fear. And so, I've been in work situations where I was at a dinner, and managers were sitting around talking about the way past employees look, the physical attributes of women. And even one other woman was chiming in because I think she felt like, this is the thing to do. And there were younger employees there, brand new employees, who had to just sit there and take it. And I basically just said to the managers, are we really having a conversation about how women look, about women's appearances right now? Are we really going to do that? And you could see the light bulb go off in their head. It didn't even occur to them that this was something that they shouldn't be doing. And I took a risk that I would have retribution or something like that, but I just decided, it was the right place and the right time to do that. And in fact, afterwards received emails from the other women thanking me for doing that. So, that's those, I have a myriad of examples like that. But I think you have to do what feels good to you. Like John said, you have to go with your gut in that moment. But understand the moment can pass. And a lot of times, a lot of people will tell you, I really wish I had said something to stand up for myself or for someone else in that moment. And you can't get it back. There really are, hardly ever do-overs. So go with your gut, and don't live in fear. Do not live in fear. Life is too short.
So thank you for that, Meryl. And I'm sorry, John, I'm going to have to pass it over so we can actually get some questions from the audience because they take time to be here. I know you will be able to answer some of their questions. We'll now begin the question and answer portion of this program, and we would be joined by Christina Deaning. Christina is the Assistant Director of Regional Engagement Program, that she will moderate the Q&A portion of our program. For this, please type your questions using the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible in the time allowed it. And again, apologies for not getting to the questions sooner. Christina.
Thank you so much, Lavonna. And we've already had a lot of really wonderful questions come in. So the first one touches, I know, Rocky and Meryl, you've talked a bit about the George Floyd movement. So this question comes from Susan Toller-Carr, who asks, how are you following up with companies' hashtag Black Lives Matter statements that were generated shortly after the hashtag George Floyd movement for their D&I programs?
Well, I can take that. Hi, Susan. Because I am the law firm diversity practice leader in my business, in my company, I received a deluge of reach outs from law firms and corporations who wanted to understand how they could handle their diversity programs. And I fielded all of those questions and inquiries to exhaustion. But what I tell companies and employers is to really think about what you're doing, how you're doing things now. Do some introspection within your company or your organization. Think about what you're doing. Think about what you can do better, but more importantly, think about what you can do differently to get a different result. Because as we know, if you continue to do the same things over and over again, you're going to and expect a different result. We know what that is. And so, if you're hiring, if you need to look at your hiring, you need to look at your retention, you need to look at your programs, you need to look at inclusion. And more important, think about, is your organization a place where people feel like they belong? Because now it's not, we're getting away from diversity. We've gone to inclusion. And now, what's really important is belonging.
And I would just add in terms of what you could do is just hold yourself accountable. At Reed Smith, one of the things we did was we came out with benchmarks that said by 2024, we want to see a 50% increase in the number of Black attorneys, a 30% increase in the number of Black employees in leadership, and a reduction in our attrition rates to be on par with the rest of the organization. So that's very public. It's keeping our leadership accountable. And so that's how we're going to ensure that we can continue to move forward.
Great, thank you. The next question I think is a great one for the whole panel. It comes from Terry Chan, who asks, can this conversation expand to include the increased violence to Asian Americans, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic?
So can I start with that? This is a conversation about being there for people, right? And so we spent most of our time talking about women, but any area where someone is different, whether it's by race or ethnicity or gender or disability or age, all of those are opportunities to be an ally, to really help people to understand my life is different because of those identities, and to really kind of invite people into a conversation. Absolutely, we can bring in what's happening with the API community, because again, we really need to understand we are causing harm. And an ally recognizes when someone's being hurt and is going to come by their side and say, is there something that I can do to help? And not assume that I know what that is, but actually ask the question, what does help look like in this situation?
And I'll just add that, there have been many demonstrations and articles of support. And I think you recognize that it's really important to do that both ways. Obviously, during the George Floyd, I think demonstrations, a lot of different groups came out that hadn't been out there before. I think we're recognizing that we all have an interest in, this isn't just an African-American issue. The problem of inequity and just decades and centuries of discrimination, it's really an American issue. So I think part of the challenge, and I guess this is one of the questions, is we need to know more about our history and then figure out what we can do about it. It's not just an academic thing. It's a question of what do we learn in school, and how do we translate that into social policy and civil rights and other things. So I'm very encouraged, but also I think people are disturbed that we're seeing this. It's not just anti-Asian violence. Obviously, we have a lot of other kinds of problems, and we have to look back at the way we've been able to address it in the past. And I think we see good examples from the civil rights movement and the women's movement where people come together.
What disturbs me the most about, I'm sorry, John, what disturbs me the most about it is the way that different races are being pitted against each other. And the fact that, Asians are, feeling this pressure of being the model race, minority and all of that. And Black folks and Asians are being pitted against each other. And I think that is why, we all, again, we all need to come together and recognize that without each other and each other's support and understanding and being empathetic, I think that's the key. And so, like on my social media, all I've been posting recently is stop Asian hate, stop Asian hate, because I want all of my Black friends to recognize that this is no different from what we're dealing with.
And specifically, if you're looking to get involved, there is an organization here in Los Angeles called Stop AAPI Hate, led by a friend of mine, Manju Kulkarni. But they both track incidents of hate and violent crimes against Asian American, Asian Pacific Islanders. So you can just go to stopaapihate.org or hashtag stopaapihate.
Thank you. So this next question does touch on a bit about coming together, and this one is directed towards Lavonna. It comes from Monica Bray, and she says, "Hi, Lavonna. In what ways can we come together to first make our own work environments, or make sure that our own work environments are safe to speak up in at all times?"
So, hi, Monica, and thank you for the question. I think Meryl mentioned the issue of authenticity. When I say that this is an inside job, I mean that I am working from the inside out, and I'm encouraging other folks to do the same. To basically say that people don't come to work with the intent to cause harm, but harm often happens because of our lack of awareness, our inability or unwillingness to kind of listen to some of the things that people are telling us about how they feel, what they think, the fact that they don't feel valued, that they don't feel that they belong, that they feel like they're by themselves. And so I think anything that you can do to build trust and to make those connections so that people don't feel those things on a regular basis, I think is critical. I think you transform organizations when you transform people, and that you give people an appreciation for what life is like for the people around them. Have difficult conversations. I tell people that I'm very comfortable making other people uncomfortable, because that's what it takes. That's what it takes to acknowledge the fact that I have been blind to my privilege. I have been blind to the suffering and the pain of the people around me. And so I'm going to take the blinders off. But that only works if I can do that in a non-judgmental environment. Don't get mad at me for things that I don't know when I'm in a society that really coached me not to know certain things, and now I'm learning them. And so it's going to be a process of learning and unlearning and relearning kind of about all of these differences that are relevant. And so let's just acknowledge that, right? We're hearing some voices for the first time. The only thing difference between May 24th, 2020 and May 25th, 2020 was George Floyd. And for all of a sudden, people who thought that race was no longer an issue because we had a Black president understood that race was front and center, that people with disabilities, that women, that seniors and young people all feel like that they're not being heard. And so we need an environment, we need spaces where we learn from one another. And again, in a judgmental, non-judgmental way, because people are often silent because they feel that they're going to be misunderstood, they're going to be judged, and they're going to be ostracized because of it. And so if we create an environment where people can fail up, I think that helps a lot.
Thank you. And we have time for one final question. This one, I think this would be directed towards you, John, because it talks a little bit about the Upstander topic that you were discussing earlier. But it comes from Jennifer Polemis, who asks, how can we be an Upstander, not performative, without coming across as a white rescuer?
It's a great question. I would say along the lines with what Lavonna just said is just remove judgment, right? You're judging yourself, right? In terms of, how you're going to be perceived. As Merle said, just act, right? I know that, there is the concept of, white fragility or white guilt. But how do you address that guilt? Why don't you just start acting, right? And so again, it's kind of thinking along the lines of why people don't act. Is it, well, I might be perceived as, being satisfying my white guilt. It's like, well, no, it's like, just act, right? And good things will come.
Thank you. So that wraps up our Q&A. I'll turn this back to Lavonna.
Thank you, Rocky, John, Merle, and Merle. It was enlightening to hear your perspectives. It was an honor to join you to discuss this very important work. I'm very proud of the actions USC has taken to create an environment where everyone feels valued and heard.